We could do anything. But what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be?
Welcome to Data-Driven Sports Betting. This is A-Train Bets, and I use my brain to make bets. In this video, we want to have a little bit of fun. We're going to have a little bit of fun with some weightings today. And the reason why is that really when you think about how we use A-Train Station, it's a multi-step process. The first step is getting the broader context correct. That's where we set our settings, we select our books, all of that stuff. We've talked about that in other videos. The second stage is where we talk about prospecting. This is where we're getting that list on the plays screen, and that list then leads us to the third step, which is where we decide on the bets we want to make. So we look at the bet details for each of those plays on the play screen. We say, okay, do we want to make this play or not? And if we do, how much? So that's the core of the process. You go make the play at the book if you so choose, go back and enter it, all that stuff. But that's just the operationalization of it. You just go and take that action, fine. But when it comes to the A-Train Station doing its part, it's about helping you figure out which bets you want to make. And if you do, how much, right? So what we're going to do in today's video is I want to talk about especially that prospecting step, because in that prospecting step, you want to cast a wide net. Sometimes you don't want to cast too wide of a net, but you want to cast a wide net and try to catch as many fish as you can. It's okay if you get some garbage in there too, because you want to catch as many fish as you can. If your job here is to catch as many fish, make as many bets, profitable bets as you can, well, what do you want to do? You want to have a big net. You want to be able to use that net in different places, and you want to be able to refine how you're using that net over time. So let's go into it and let's explore a little bit. Like I said, we're going to have a little bit of fun today. We'll go into our analyze screen, and here's our default weightings right now. And our default weightings are kind of just here to be a general good starting point. So if we look at this, let's save these weightings for our default weightings, and we'll see what they have in the market right now. And so it's morning on a Tuesday. Not going to be a whole lot of stuff happening, so keep that in mind. What we see here is some SciCam blocks. We see some points, a few of these different blocks plays. The problem is that these blocks plays, when we look at them, what you can see is that BetOnline is offering a rogue line on these right now. This is a terrible play, and it's throwing off the whole market. So what you could do is you can go in and say, okay, well, we see BetOnline's throwing off the whole market. We're actually going to fix this in an upcoming release where the one-sided lines that are way off the market don't get counted at all. But it's probably important to be able to see them in certain contexts. So we want to have them on here. We just don't want them to factor into our no vig line calculation, which has completely skewed this market. We look and say, okay, who's representative? We'll say maybe PointsBet US in this case is representative. We go and look at it. We're like, hey, there's nothing of EV here at all. So on this screen, because of the way we have those book weightings, we say, you know what? That BetOnline line, that rogue line is throwing all this off. We don't like that. And that's I can tell you that's what's happening on all of these blocks plays. That's exactly what's happening. So there's a couple ways you can handle it. You can look in each one of them and then ultimately find that they're not any good. Or we can go back to the weighting screen and say, you know what? Tired of seeing these blocks plays. Even though BetOnline is usually very good, let's take them off right now entirely. So now we can save the weightings. We're going to go back and look at what you see. A lot less, because we've removed that false error from this current list. But you're like, well, Train, I want more bets than this. And I think that's a reasonable request. So what we can then do is go back to the weighting screen and say, okay, let's see if we can't find something more interesting to use. So let's clear all the weightings. So instead of trying to take this big broad-based market view, let's just start saying, okay, who do we think is sharp in these markets today? We think Caesars is sharp. We'll give them a 1. We think Pinnacle's pretty sharp. We'll give them a 2. We think they're twice as sharp as Caesars. Maybe that's true. Low vig, they're pretty good also, and they follow a lot of the same things that BetOnline does. Let's give them not a 51. Let's give them a 1. Who else? William Hill, they're like Caesars. Oftentimes they are exactly like Caesars. We'll give them a 1. Okay, fine. BetOnline, we won't include them because we don't want to see all those other things. So let's say save those weightings and let's see what that gives us. So now we have a couple different plays. So in this case, we see this Andre Burakovsky. Well, we didn't see that a little bit ago. Let's see what's going on here. So we can see in PointsBet, ESPN bet, you can make these plays plus 110. You glance at the market, you're like, well, these are clearly pretty good plays off the market. And you can see very quickly why this play's showing up. And it's because Pinnacle has a pretty solidly different opinion than the rest of the market. Well, what does it tell you then? You see Pinnacle's hold here is extremely low compared to everybody else. That is something we like. We can also see Caesars, which is one of our sharp books. They have a one-sided line here, which isn't helping anything. So let's just click on Pinnacle. So now we're evolving. We're interacting with this bet details because we're trying to decide, do I make a bet? And if I do, how much? In this case, we're seeing Burakovsky points over at PointsBet still looking pretty good. This plus 110, pretty different from Pinnacle's minus 105. We're currently treating Pinnacle as the only sharp book in this market. So if that's the case, I could argue going and playing this bet at either PointsBet or ESPN bet, sounds like a really good idea, because if you believe Pinnacle is very sharp, and I do, this is like finding that needle in the haystack. This is why on the play screen, we think of this. If you're looking for needles in a haystack, what's better than a really big magnet, right? You just take this magnet and you look at different haystacks. So the weightings that we're currently using found those plays. And then we say, okay, you know what? That was fun. Let's just use Pinnacle alone. This is a popular strategy, is just say, I just want to look at Pinnacle. Now all of a sudden you see just Pinnacle lines, we're getting even more. We get that same Burakovsky shots on goal that we had a minute ago, but we also have a bunch of other things that look pretty compelling from a variety of perspectives. So you can see, let's take a look at this Toronto Raptors and Chicago Bulls. We just go into it. You see this one, that means it hasn't been updated in the last minute. It's been 1 minute since the last update. We'd refresh and it's refreshed. So now we have the latest and the greatest. So in this case, we see Pinnacle has once again a pretty different opinion to the rest of the market. Bet online here that we just noticed, even though we're not using them as a sharp book line, they have very strong parity with Pinnacle. And that gives us enough confidence to say, you know what, kind of like this play. I'm going to run over to PointsBet US and make this play at minus 115, because this Scotty Barnes points, rebounds, assists under 38.5, knowing that unders tend to be a sharper play in isolation, we could really say, yes, this is definitely one where we have the two sharpest books that we know about having a pretty different opinion than everybody else. This is a play that I'm inclined to make, right? That is the exact way we can do this. Now, this Pinnacle only search was just fishing in a new fishing hole, right? We were just casting that net in a different place, but it allows us to see all these different plays just because of the way we're trying to gauge sharpness in the market. But it doesn't mean this has to be what we use on the detail screen. That's the big point of this video. Don't simply use the weightings that you have, whatever they are. Don't blindly use them and just make all the plays. That's cutting off your legs. You have to use your brain to make bets. Go into these screens and say, what is this market telling us? Can I understand the data story behind it? And in this case, we have such parity on the two sharpest books. I'm making this play at PointsBet. If I'm playing at PointsBet, I'm making this play, right? That's the kind of power that you have by using different weightings and then exploring different things. So you don't have to do one by one or go through all of them. You say, oh, this one's interesting. Jaylen Brown rebounds under 5.5. Let's check this one out. And I'm doing all this real time. I haven't looked at any of these ahead of time. This one is interesting, right? But you have BetOnline and Pinnacle, once again, pretty close on what their perceptions of the market are. We like that. Caesars goes even further. I wonder what happens if we go Caesars is the sharpest book of the market. All of a sudden, this bet looks even better. Like, well, we know Caesars is pretty sharp, and BetOnline and Pinnacle are pretty sharp too. Let's go and just say, okay, let's go back to this Pinnacle only. We like that. Now all of a sudden you're saying, okay, I'm down with playing a few of these. You can look at BetOnline by itself too. All right, it looks like it's a little bit negative, but it's still in the ballpark of what Pinnacle had. So it's still pretty good. BetOnline is a little bit, so you're like, okay, three sharp books. You've got BetOnline, doesn't give me any positive EV. We call that the worst case scenario. Pinnacle might be my average case scenario, and Caesars is the best case scenario. And when you factor them all in, you say, all right, I might be willing to maybe not put the full $60 recommended bet that Pinnacle has on this because you're a little bit concerned about the BetOnline side. Maybe you'll put down 30. Maybe you decide, yeah, you know what? I've got better plays. So in this case, I like Jaylen Brown rebounds under 5.5 as a general play. If you had a perception of how well Jaylen Brown's been playing lately, or you have a feeling, or you've looked at some statistics on what his normal rebounds are, you might want to factor that in, because the fact is so much of what we're doing with this top-down betting is based on the efficient market hypothesis. And that efficient market hypothesis basically says that all the information available gets baked into the price. The fact is, though, that takes time. And when you think about efficient market hypothesis in terms of stock trading, makes a lot of sense. You have Apple stock, right? We know a lot about Apple. They make these iPhone things. They make these MacBook things. They make these other things, right? Watches and other shit, software and app stores and everything. Everybody knows about it. You know what? Apple's also a pretty old company at this point. They've been around for a while, right? You know how long Indiana Pacers versus Boston Celtics on January 30th, 2024 has been around? Not that long. Maybe 2 days, right? And so, granted, in the efficient market hypothesis, when you know so much about an organization, a company, a stock, there's a lot of people looking at Apple for a long time to get to that efficient market. Here in sports betting, it's kind of chaos because we have a lot of people, sure, not as many as in the financial industry, but we have a lot of people looking at these, factoring in what they know. The fact is, though, this is nowhere near as efficient of a market. This stock only exists for like 2.5 days at most. You know, in NFL football might exist a couple weeks, you know, maybe some soccer matches a month, but that's the entire existence of this entire bet. This is the company. This is the stock. So how much information is truly available compared to what you see about Apple? How much information do we really know that gets baked into this price perfectly? No, not a lot. So there is a place where you can use your information to help you select your bets. I wouldn't necessarily say, well, Jaylen Brown has made a rebounds under 5.5 3 out of the last 7 days, and I think it should be at plus 114 instead of plus 112. No, at that point, you're just making shit up. Right? But you really do want to understand. If you understand some things about this team, the game, the people, and all of the dynamics, I can pretty well assure you it's not perfectly priced into sports betting markets. It's somewhat priced in. The more obvious the information is, the better. When we had somebody score, when Doncic scores 74 points or whatever it was the other night, that raised a lot of eyebrows. A lot of people knew that. And a lot of people the next day went and bet the under, which still won on his point total. But that's where it's obvious and it's still valuable. So those are situations where you want to be thinking about how might the broader context influence this. That's all context and data too. It's not showing up necessarily on this screen, but it is showing up on the overall data that's coming into the universe about this play. That's the thing that you want to be thinking about. So what we're talking about today is a little bit different, because what we're saying is, hey, use those weightings and don't lock them in. I've been very specifically on my live streams lately using different sets of weightings every day, because I don't want people just copying them and playing them blindly. I want them using it as a prospecting tool, playing it a little bit differently, looking for different edges and trying to understand, is there something new that the data is telling us today? That's where you start to understand. You start to map out this whole lake of sports betting, and you start saying, where's the good fish at? Too many boots over there. Got more fish over here. Let's go over here again. Haven't seen those fish there in a while. I mean, we used to play these DraftKings unders all the time, and we haven't seen them in the last few days. Have they adjusted? Maybe. We don't know, but we're not seeing them. So it's things like that. Like, everything is constantly changing. You've got to continue to change yourself. If you get locked in your ways, you might win for a few days, and then all of a sudden, boom, something changes. You're not going to see it, and it's just going to be losing time. It's the funny thing about sports betting, is that anytime you do something wrong, it tends to mean you lose. You don't get lucky like in some things. You just luck into something. That doesn't seem to happen very much in sports betting. So with that, I think that really covers the goal. The goal for today was to really just introduce you to that weightings and thinking about it differently. Think about those weightings differently in how you're using it. Prospect. Find as many different fish in as many different fishing holes as you can. You don't have to eat them all yourself. You can just say, throw those back. Throw those back. Fine. We'll go back and look at them again tomorrow. These bets only going to exist for a couple days at most. A lot of them just one day. So recognize the patterns, but be open and exploring new things. I think the weightings are so much fun to be curious and creative with. There's no harm in bringing more into a plays list that then gives you a whole bunch of options, right? That's great. We love that. Just be diligent when you cast a very wide net in the play screen. Be very thoughtful on how you analyze the play in the detail screen. So you can do that as much as you want. And I think that'll teach you a lot about sharp sports betting. I think that'll help you find new edges in the markets. And I think it'll keep you on your toes as things change around you. So that's the key for today. With that, until next time, save the units for the bros and do your betting like the pros.